board. So really, really excited to see what happens here. Which of the players can compose themselves better? Magnus is making moves while standing up, sitting down. Both of them are eating. And Magnus switching hands, playing 1d4.
Game 3 is officially underway. I want to get a heart rate monitor on these two. Daniel, if you had to predict, do you think their heart rate would be as stable and calm as what we're seeing on the screen, at least as calm as their body language is? Or do you think that would be a whole different story?
Well, I think that that short break between the second and third games did wonders to calm them down and calm their heart rate down. But I'm sure that they probably could do with a cardiologist standing right outside of their their place of residence. I could do with one too. Maybe just a traveling chess cardiologist. There actually is a FIDE master named Tansel Turgut. He's a correspondence grandmaster and he works as a cardiologist in Illinois. So see, I know one off the top of my head. FIDE Master Turgut, maybe he wants some new clients. The Catalan wants some new clients. We see Magnus Carlsen putting on his Jan Nepomniachtchi hat. Jan has been playing the Catalan very regularly with the white pieces in rapid time controls. I haven't seen it as many times from Magnus, but I'm all for it.
The Catalan doesn't need any new clients though, because it's one of the most played openings at the absolute top level, elite level of the chess world. We've seen it so many times in World Championship matches, especially the 2021 World Championship match immediately comes to mind, Magnus against Jan. We saw the Catalan employed by both players, and here we see Rook to C1 lined up on the C file. Daniel, this so far has been the most sane position that we've seen all day.
Yeah, definitely Magnus choosing something more positional. We had a Ruy Lopez in game 1. Carlsen, clearly not a huge fan of how that opening unfolded. That was a crazy game in its own right with a knight sacrifice in the early middle game. But here Magnus kind of dialing it back, getting something relatively non-theoretical. And when I say non-theoretical, Tanya, of course the Catalan is ultra-theoretical in its own right. But the price of a move is not that high. You can basically play any move in the position and the evaluation doesn't change too much, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, because it's a slow strategic fight. And speaking of that, time is really not of the essence on the board. We might even see white very typically move that bishop from d2, which has been moved once, twice. It might land on another square. It's often the f4 square, vacating that d2 spot for the knight, because you really want the b1 knight to move ahead to that d2 square, not develop on c3. And maybe we can just show that with arrows. We might even get a move in, Daniel. I guess like bishop f4, knight d2 would just go on to prove your point that here you can really take your time to achieve the setup that you want. It's not fireworks just yet, but at some point these positions do tend to open up. And wow, there's another approach. It's opened up right now, a trade, and the rook and the queen perfectly lined up to enter the 7th rank.
And you often see a move like queen c6 or queen c7 in the Catalan, but if you do it prematurely, there will be hell to pay. If you play queen c6 and run into bishop to a6, that queen becomes a huge liability. So instead, you do see the move bishop f4 by Carlsen. Good call, Tanya. That bishop is angling toward c7, and the knight gets out to c3. I wanted to briefly point out that the history behind how the Catalan got its name is really interesting. Obviously, it's named after the Spanish region of Catalonia. But in preparation for there was a tournament in Barcelona in, I want to say 1928 or 1929. The organizers asked the French Grandmaster Savelli Tardekauer, who is known for some very pithy chess sayings, to develop an opening that honors the city's kind of status on the vanguard of European development. I love Barcelona. To this very day, it remains kind of an edgy, grungy city with great food and a great cultural scene. And so Savelli Tardekauer in 1929 developed the Catalan opening to pay his respects to the city of Barcelona. Back then, it was considered radical to develop your bishop to g2 on move 3 and to not play 1e4. So that's how the opening got its name. And ever since, it has withstood the test of time. Not sure Magnus Carlsen's position is going to withstand the test of Alireza Firouzja's great play. Queen to a4, looking to establish a knight on b5. This is a typical idea. You are potentially walking into the move rook to c4, but then I guess the queen will drop back to b3. And Magnus's point is that rook is kind of like a middle schooler at a dance. Very awkward, doesn't have a dance partner. Tanya, you don't seem too thrilled by Magnus's play. Or by my analogies. Probably it's the latter, not the former.
I love the analogies, but I do love Alireza's play in this one as well. Not sure what it's like without the dance partner, but it feels like Alireza's got enough piece coordination to find the partners that he needs to execute his plan here. One of the very thematic ideas in this position, Daniel, and I think it's very up Alireza's alley, is to actually play a move like b5 if
Up his
you can get it
Alireza.
in. Up his
Sorry.
Alireza. I love it. But just coming back to the board, that's actually a really good one. B5 is something that you have to always watch out for. And it's a pawn sacrifice. And I'm not sure where exactly, and maybe you're going to help me out with this, because there are so many ideas. Okay, he goes for a different, more attacking approach, and maybe we'll see b5 next, because he says, why sacrifice a pawn when I can first throw your queen out of the way and then start expanding on the queen side? Also makes a lot of sense.
But your point is well taken, Tanya. B5, I just want to spotlight your idea. Queen b3 might have run into b5, and this might have been the reason Magnus decided to go all the way back. If you play knight takes b5, here you actually drop a piece to a4, hitting the queen. Queen loses contact with the knight is lost. So Magnus just milked some time off of Alireza's clock and dropped the queen back to d1. You called it. There comes b5, opening up the b6 square for black's queen. The one thing I would be careful about, though, is if Magnus plays this little move e3, be very careful about the bishop dropping back to its initial square, kicking away the rook, and sometimes black bites off more than he can chew on the queen side. So I think that this game is about to heat up yet again. They always find a way to make things tactical. These two.
They always make it fun for us, right? And you're right. It starts with a Catalan. We were expecting a slow, strategic, long World Championship style battles, but none of that. Alireza is already expanding on the queen side. And like you said, you have to always watch out for ideas like b4, even ideas in certain position where perhaps white can go a4, fix that queen side pawn, and then eventually play b4 to create more weaknesses. I think e3 feels like the match, and great call there. It's on the board, so stopping b4 for now. I think Alireza is going to improve his pieces. You want to get that rook from f8 into the game. You suggested a move earlier, Daniel, and I'm gonna just go ahead with that. I think queen b6 here as well makes a lot of sense.
I think we should give ourselves a pat on the back. We've been calling a lot of these moves, and bishop f1 is the logical follow-up. And I would not be... easy clap. I would not be surprised if Alireza just leaves his rook on c4 and says, take my rook, because you're going to give me these juicy light squares on the long diagonal. At the same time, it's easier said than done. I'm just following in the spirit of all the sacrifices we've seen thus far. Not this time, though. Alireza drops his rook back. Magnus, a4, establishing a stronghold on b5. And I'm starting to get a little bit nervous for black's situation on the queen side. This is a very Magnus type of position. He definitely prefers this to the chaos we saw in the first two games.
This is not Alireza? You're trying to say it's not up his Alireza? For Alireza, he wants the chaos, but he's not getting it in this one. And Daniel, now as the pawn structure on the queen side gets fixed, it's going to be a fight for the only open file in the position. Who can actually grab the c file? It's black's rook that can quickly double up. White posts the knight on the b5 square, so really controlling some key diagonals and squares there. But rook c8 on the board, and once again, that is the one file that the players will be battling out for, and usually the one that gets control over it has the upper hand, has the long-term advantage to actually push for more in these positions.
The one problem black is up against is if Magnus plays rook takes rook, which I think is very likely, you cannot capture back with the queen, which you would like to do because of knight b5 to a7 with a very unconventional fork. So Alireza pre-moves rook takes c6, now rook to c1. So it's not always the side that gets to a file first that ultimately ends up owning that file. Usually it's Magnus Carlsen who ends up owning the file. Now Carlsen has this idea of doubling up on the c file, and your point is well taken, Tanya. If Alireza just gives up the c file, why is that so bad? One of the reasons is the threat of bishop to c7. So let me just make a random move and just show how quickly black's position can end up collapsing. Magnus, I think, is bringing Alireza to his knees here. Here you would drop the a pawn, and this is a byproduct of Magnus's 18th move. When he pushed a4, he established a weakness on a5, and that is why we see Alireza bringing the knight back to e8, a very savvy defensive move, covering the c7 square, trying to keep all of the entry points sealed off. But there's no question Magnus is thrilled to have this type of, I want to call it an endgame. I will call it an endgame if the rooks come off the board.
Call it what you want, but Alpha Zero, Alpha Magnus is on the board. H4 been played, so always watch out for the H pawn going all the way across the board to H6 to create even more weaknesses. It might be something that you might just want to stop with your own kingside pawn move with H6 at some point. But Daniel, to me, it's all about this fight that we've been talking about, right? On the C file. Do you think White can start thinking about doubling up there? Rook C2, Queen C1, trying to force Alireza's hand to give up that C file?
Well, my vote would have been rook c2. Magnus pushes the pawn up to h5, which is a very committal move because that pawn now becomes a serious liability. Black's knight can jump back to f6 when the time is right. I think Magnus is essentially saying your knights are stuck where they are because one knight is covering the e5 square, the other knight is covering the c7 square. So I don't mind getting my pawn to h5, tossing the ball back into Black's court. Maybe Alireza can consider a move like bishop to d8, just trying to cover all of the bases. Instead, we see bishop b7, and I don't know if h5 was necessary, Tanya. I thought that Magnus could have gotten down to business on the c file. I still think he's very much in the driver's seat here.
The kind of Magnus that we've been seeing all day, what are the chances that he completely switches up the plan and goes all out on the king's side now with g4, g5, and crashing through? I know you'd love to see it happen. I would definitely love to see it happen.
Not that low. I mean, maybe we'll see king g2. This is Sparta, g4, and king g3. And I'm only half joking because there's a high probability we get a lot of the heavy piece trades on the c file. We might get a 4 minor piece endgame, which you don't see every day if the rooks and the queens come off the board. So there's a lot of different directions that this game can go down. Right now, Magnus has to find a way to improve his position. And there we have it. Knight d2, heading for b3 and putting more pressure on this weak pawn on a5. Alireza's position is really, really unpleasant here.
You know, Magnus has this incredible ability to piece all these unique aspects of the position together with this full board awareness. He first goes h4, h5. He might never expand further on the king side, but he knows Alireza always has to watch out for ideas like g4, g5. Then he completely switches his entire attention, and also to point out that knight move also frees up a potential queen transfer to the king side at the right moment. But it's that a5 weakness, the long-term weakness, which is so easy to forget about, easy to miss in this position. And Magnus, this is his type of chess. This is his bread and butter, where everything is his bread and butter when it comes to the chessboard, but especially this kind of slow maneuvering, right? Where it just feels like his opponent has no counterplay, no real pawn breaks in the position, no real activity and targets, while he can play on the right side of the board, then switch over to the queen side as well. He can play all over, and then Alireza will be the one who'll have to answer some big questions when he decides to break either with e4 or putting up the big pressure on a5.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hardest things in chess is to keep the status quo, to do nothing. And Magnus is using that as a weapon because some people might be wondering, okay, he gets his knight to b3. What's he going to do next? Well, that's not important. He's going to ask Alireza what he's going to do next. And it's very hard for Black to find a move. Black is getting suffocated slowly but surely. As for what Magnus does next after he finishes the knight maneuver, well, at that point, he can consider trading rooks and putting a queen on c2. First, he's going to overprotect the h5 pawn, so he saw that coming. And he's also using Alireza's clock against him. I think Firouzja has to try to transform the position somehow, introduce a tactical element to the game, maybe slam a knight onto e4. The problem is that the more weaknesses you make, the more Magnus is going to twist the knife into Black's position. Alireza has to be perfect here if he wants to survive in this game.
I'm trying to imagine a scenario where Black manages to create chaos here, to make it random here, and I'm struggling because this is such a non-Alireza kind of position, right? You really don't have targets. Your bishop on b7 is blocked by its own pawn on d5. The queen on b6 is blocked by white's pieces and pawns. Where's your activity? You just have to stay still. And we see Alireza trying to jump, trying to get that random chaos on the board. He says, I'm okay to change the dynamics of the position. Magnus says, not interested. I'm going for that a5 pawn. That's my plan. I'm sticking to it. The knight on e4 looks pretty, but got no targets.
Thanks, but no thanks, says Magnus Carlsen, because the trade on e4 would have also given black the d5 square. So the other knight from e8 could have circled around and established itself on an outpost. Magnus keeping the position maximally complex as Alireza drops under 2 minutes. One more mistake, one more inaccuracy, one more wrong step, and black's position will collapse. This is really dangerous, Tanya. Rook takes c6, and putting a queen on the c-file is an easy way for white to keep the knife twisted into black's position.
And we often talk about how big a role the clock plays when it's a tactical, crazy position on the board because you need to be precise. But even these kind of positions with lots of pieces on the board, all sorts of minor pieces still on the board, it's equally hard to play with just under 2 minutes because without realizing, you can get into a situation where you're completely out of space and you're just getting positionally outplayed and you don't even know it. By the time you realize it's too late. So Daniel, even though this is not the crazy chaos of tactics, this positional strategic play as well, with a minute and a half on the clock, is going to be a tough one for Alireza to defend.
Yeah, give Alireza a tactical position with 90 seconds left. He'd be much happier than a situation like this. And trust me, when you've got 90 seconds and you're playing, it's much different than watching a game. You think, oh, he's got over a minute. He's got plenty of time. But when you're watching that clock dwindle against Magnus, you get this impending sense of total hopelessness because Magnus, just look at how he's controlling the game. Even his last move, King G2, it's a simple move, but it is an alpha move, stopping the knight check on H3. Now he's going to push his pawn up to G4, completing the pawn chain, keeping black's knights completely restricted. He's now covering the E4 square. No, switching to tactical play, knight to C5. And if Alireza takes on H5, I think he has knight D7 and the queen could get trapped, crazily enough. This is next level play by Carlsen. Oh, knight D7.
And Magnus is shocked. He's shocked that Alireza just made that move.
Bishop. Oh my gosh, he's got bishop B8 and bishop A7. That is
Daniel,
that is out of this world.
That's from another planet. Will he find it? Because knight D7 feels like the move that you want to make. That is true.
Let's pull up an analysis board. Knight to D7 was my intention. I think this was probably what Magnus wanted initially. It doesn't work, Tanya, because of rook takes C1, and it opens up an escape square for black's queen. It opens up an escape shoot. But the correct move is bishop to B8 with essentially an unstoppable threat of bishop to A7 trapping the queen. And if black plays rook to C8 to vacate the C6 square, at this point, knight D7 is probably strong. Even the move F4 seals the deal. Maybe? But look, I mean, this is wild geometry. Can he spot this move? Can he spot it?
Will he find it? Will he find
bishop to B8? Yes, he does.
Oh my gosh. Magnus Carlsen leans back. Alireza Firouzja with a shake of his head. Alireza completely missed this idea. And Daniel, that's a tough one to spot. But like you said, it's a move from another planet, but so is Magnus Carlsen's chess.
I don't know if I've ever played, I definitely have never played the moves bishop F4 to B8 to A7 in succession in my entire career. I think most of us haven't. 30 seconds for Firouzja. His queen is about to get trapped. And most importantly, on the other side of the board, his knights are also going to get victimized by white's pieces. This has been an absolute masterpiece by Carlsen. Can he finish it off with just a couple of accurate moves, Tanya? Rook to C8. Alireza is not about to give this game away. Magnus needs to find a follow-up here, and F4 is a really tough move. Just keep leaving the bishop on pre and realizing that knight D7 is the saving grace. F4 will do it.
You can first hit the queen, right? You get out of the way. You go bishop to A7, force the queen to go. The only square I see is C6. And then you go with the idea of F4. You're attacking both knights on the board.
That's true. And maybe knight E4 there. No, but then you just take the other knight on H5. Yeah, bishop A7 could be thrown in. And I don't see a compelling argument for why it shouldn't. But Magnus is taking his time. I mean, even knight to D7 here should maintain a huge advantage. Even if you don't end up winning one of these pieces on the king side, just getting this into an endgame should be enough to win the game. Let's wait for Magnus's move.
He's going to go for more. He wants a material advantage right now. He can feel it. You can sense the discoordination between the two knights on the king side and the rest of the army that Alireza has on the queen side. And Magnus's final decision is knight D7. This gets fun. What happens
Just
next?
trade queens and go knight e5. Trade queen. This is such a Magnus decision. Trade queens and go knight e5, using the threat of f4 in order to force a favorable trade. I actually like this even more than the immediate f4 because this is just such a Magnus decision. On the other hand, look at Firouzja, f4, f6. And Magnus needs to find one more tactical solution here. Is it fg and g4, trapping the knight on h5?
Looks
Wow.
really good to me.
That wins
And
the
why
game.
not?
fg and g4. Got to do it.
That's a great spot, and Magnus
No!
has got a minute to spot that. He doesn't. But also a really good idea because he hits that
Yeah.
bishop on e8. And Daniel, that bishop needs to stay connected to that knight on h5.
But Alireza is basically banking. Alireza's banking a bunch of pawns in return for his minor piece, and this is not over. Bishop takes g5. Magnus with a little bit of a sloppy conversion there. Alireza wants to take on e3, Tanya, and go bishop to c1. Pawns are disappearing off the board. No, this should be a win for Carlsen. I mean, with 6 seconds left, how does Alireza manage this tension? Takes on d4. That is correct. And bishop to c1. Still some work to do for Carlsen.
But the d5 pawn hangs as well. You pick up
Yes.
the b2 pawn. Need to
Knight
defend
c4.
d4. And you know what, Daniel? I think Magnus can start also thinking about setting up a kill zone for that black king.
Yep.
These 3 minor pieces are coming for the king.
And with 1 second, there's no way Alireza is surviving this with...
Don't take on d4, because knight f5 would have been a check.
Oh, that's a great spot. Knight e4, knight takes c3, trading the bishops. Now you got to watch this pawn. But Magnus can just bring his king in. Yes. Bishop a3 is the key. Can you trade, though? No. No need. This is winning.
This is game over. Bishop on a3 cannot be challenged. Magnus up a piece. There are 2 pawns remaining for white, which are enough to do the job. It's not that easy to win the c2 pawn just yet. You might have to give up the d5 pawn to be able to do that. Daniel, how easy of a convert is this for Magnus?
Pretty easy, but he's got to sidestep some tension here because Alireza is going to advance his pawn to h4. So Magnus has to spend those 40 seconds he's got calculating whether he can convert his pawn before Alireza converts his. h4 was a bold pre-move by Firouzja. Gaining some time. Magnus? Yeah, bishop d3. What a classy move. Just eliminating the pawn calmly and then stepping to e4 to stop the other pawn. We might get a double bishop checkmate here. By Carlsen, which will be a real treat to watch.
He had to go king d8 before pushing the h-pawn because bishop f5 would have come in with the check, picking up this pawn as well. None of that allowed. Magnus has picked up the c2 pawn. Alireza knows it's over, but he's going to keep fighting this one. Daniel, I don't see him surviving it. He needs a miracle. And there's a checkmate coming in. The d-pawn moves forward. That's going to promote a new queen will be born.